Hello, beautiful human, and welcome back to Inner Space. I'm Danielle Y.S., founder of Inner Eye Wellness, an astrobiologist turned grief doula. Inner Space is a place to nurture your life's journey so that you can dive inside with curiosity to live with deeper trust, peace, and purpose. Whether it's life or death, work or play, solitude or connection, inner space is where true life begins. So let's dive in. We are now deep into the autumn season here in the Northern Hemisphere. Leaves have basically all fallen off the trees, and the days are short and dark. There's a chill in the air. Snow has fallen deeply in many parts of this hemisphere, and this is a time of year when it feels like time itself is accelerating. My students in my yoga classes and my clients say, "How did the holidays come so quick? 2024 is just around the corner." And I'm right there with them. And for much of the world's population, November is a time of gathering as families, friends, and loved ones come together to celebrate their own rituals and traditions. It's a time of warmth, connection, reconnection, cheer, and a whole lot of drama. So whether you love this time of year, or you're someone who likes to pretend the holidays don't exist, this theme will support you in moving through this month with more peace and power. That's why at Inner Eye Wellness, I've chosen the November theme, Holding Healthy Boundaries, to help us all move through the holidays, including our triggers, traumas, activators, limiting life patterns, and more, with more ease and grace. Because if we can do this with the people we love, we can face all of life with more light, peace, and joy. So last episode, we explored what boundaries were and why they're so important to know about and hold, and how to identify when your boundaries are being crossed. Today, we are going to apply what we explored last week in episode 8 to holding healthy boundaries while grieving. We'll talk about boundaries with who you talk to and who you spend your time with when grieving any kind of loss. We'll talk about boundaries around when you let yourself grieve and feel the loss. And we'll talk about boundaries for you, how much you take on from the thing that no longer is. So recap from last week, boundaries are not necessarily a logical or black and white thing. There's a lot of information on the internet about boundaries, what they are, how to set them, and the categories that you can use. Oftentimes the resources you see online will say pick a category, whether that's work, personal, time, physical, and then identify areas where you feel you need better boundaries or should have better boundaries. Then you go through and fill out logically what you think it should be. Now, this is a great starting point, but what I found is that it's often not flexible enough for the nuances of who a human is and the nuances of relationships with other nuanced human beings. So when I talk about boundaries, we're talking about them with respect to our energy, our life force energy. Whether we feel depleted after a particular action, choice, or interaction, whether we feel energized. And we reverse engineer our boundaries based on our bodies and the intuitive knowledge that our bodies have about how we move through this world. So first, let's talk about boundaries with respect to who you talk to and who you spend your time with when grieving a loss. This is a really, really important thing to know as you face a loss, because not everybody is going to be able to support you in the way that you need. And in fact, some people are going to make it harder for you to process your grief. Not because they're trying to, not because they're doing it consciously, but probably because they don't have that healthy of boundaries themselves. For example, when we're grieving, Oftentimes, it's confusing to know whether we want to be around people or whether we don't. When we are alone, we want to be with people. And when we're with people, we tend to want to be alone. So as we navigate this confusing portion, there's an added layer of who to be with. Some people will be able to be there for you and just do that. Be there. Oftentimes, it's just the presence that we need when we're grieving, but some people can't give us just that. Some people will want to talk, and as they talk, put their own worries, stresses, sadness, and grief onto you, adding to your own, and that's never going to help you. For example, a client of mine was going through a grieving process when facing a medical scare. She was in a state of limbo and didn't know what the outcome was going to be of some medical tests. She was terrified and starting to grieve the life that she had built in her mind if the medical tests were to come back positive. She was terrified. And late at night one night, she started to feel anxious and started to cry. And so she reached out to a friend. This friend knew about the situation, answered the phone, and my client was bawling, saying how scared she was and worried and didn't know what to do or say, but just wanted to talk to somebody. And what ended up happening was my client's friend talked at my client, tried to make them feel better by talking about all the things that they were experiencing, all the worries, all the fears, all the anxiety that was coming up for them, assuming that that was also what my client was feeling. Some of it was, some of it wasn't. But the outcome of that call was that my client felt unheard and with an added weight of their friend's worry and grief. So as you navigate who to talk to, as you face grief, notice the energy in your body. In this case, after my client hung up the phone, she felt even more depleted. She felt exhausted even. For those people that can just be there for you, usually that means you feel a little bit more full. You feel like you've been seen and held and witnessed. Now that we've explored how we can use boundaries to help us find who to talk to when we're grieving, let's talk about boundaries around when you let yourself grieve and feel the loss. Now, this is not always controllable, especially in the early stages of loss and grief. But as you learn tools to help you regulate and become more emotionally balanced, you'll be able to choose when you do go into it and when you put it aside for now. It's not a box that we put a lid on and shove far away in our minds, never to look at again, or hopefully never to look at again. But instead, it's a box without a lid that we lovingly put our grief into, put to the side for now, and then come back to when we are ready to. When we start out grieving, it's not controllable. One of my clients described it as having bursts of sadness and grief that come out of nowhere. Another client said, "I wish I could talk about it without crying." And as we work together, build up our tools, discuss it in ways that are healthily boundaried so that my clients feel more energized as we discuss and as we explore, they begin to feel the ability to first notice when the waves of grief are coming up, then regulate, then set their boundary around when they want to explore it. They can choose to dive into it in that moment if it feels right for them and if it feels safe. And they can also choose to put it in that box without a lid, set it aside for now, and come back to it later. For example, when I first started out my inward journey, I was working in New York City. I was so deep in grief and loss that I cried all morning and all night when I was at home and in my meditation practice. But when I went to the gym to kickbox, I could put it all aside for an hour and channel my energy into something else. And when I went to work, I could identify when it was starting to rise up in me and I could choose to step away from my computer and meditate for 5 minutes to come back to balance, and then go process what came up at home later that day. Have you ever worried about when your grief would come up, or felt like when it did come up, it might not be the right place? What if you could have the right people to talk to who would just be there for you and offer that safe space so that when you left that conversation, you felt held and seen and supported? If you're feeling like this is something that you want, but you don't know how to get there, consider finding the resources that are right for you to learn about this. And if you want help from a guide, I'd love to hear more about what you're going through. You can always visit innereye.org/getstarted to learn more and to tell me about what's happening, where you feel stuck, unseen, depleted. Again, that's inner-i.org/getstarted to learn more. So now we've discussed boundaries when you're grieving, around who you talk to and spend your time with. We've also explored them around when you let yourself grieve and feel the emotions of loss. Let's now dive into setting boundaries around yourself when you're grieving. Specifically, how much you take on from the person, place, or thing that has gone. There's another quote, I believe it's from the book Love Warrior by Glennon Doyle, although every time I look back, I cannot find this quote, so don't quote me on this quote. But the idea of it is that the author always thought of boundaries as a way to keep other people out. But as they went through their own journey, they realized that boundaries are really a way to keep me in. In his book, The Heart of Yoga, TKV Desikachar talks about prana in much the same way. Now, prana is life force energy. I've said this term a couple of times throughout this episode and in the previous episode, episode 8, saying I'll get to it. I'll say more in episode 9. Well, here it is. In this book, Desikachar says that prana can be described as something that flows continuously from somewhere inside us, an infinite source of energy that is within us. It fills us and keeps us alive. Prana, or life force energy, is vitality. It is aliveness. In ancient yoga texts, prana is an integral part of the yoga practice. They tell us that someone who is troubled and restless or confused has more prana outside the body than within, meaning that the amount of prana outside the body is greater when we feel unwell. At those times, the quality of prana or life force energy and its density within the body is reduced. And when we have too little prana or life force energy in the body, that can express itself as feeling stuck or restricted. It can also show up as a lack of drive or motivation to do anything. We end up feeling listless or even depressed. We may even suffer from physical ailments when we don't have prana inside the body. On the other hand, when we're feeling more peaceful and well-balanced, the less of our prana is dispersed outside the body. So how does this relate to boundaries, especially when we're grieving? Remember that we've talked about boundaries as an action or choice that, when crossed, leaves us feeling depleted. But when we hold them, and we hold healthy boundaries, we feel more fulfilled, more filled with energy. And again, this energy isn't related to the calories that we intake per day or the caffeine that we have or the amount of sleep even, but instead it's that inherent energy that keeps us alive, not just living. And when we feel unwell, that energy is dispersed beyond our body, like a water balloon that has holes all over it. But when we feel healthy and strong and vital, our life force energy stays within our body. It radiates to the very edges of our skin. We can feel it tingling. We can feel it supporting us, moving us forward, keeping us present in the world and peaceful. So this quote, or this idea of a quote, that oftentimes we think about boundaries as a way of keeping people out, like a picket fence around our house. But really, they're a way to keep me in. Is talking about this life force energy, is talking about prana, is talking about our own innate vitality. And it doesn't mean that this is a selfish thing of keeping our energy all for ourselves and not giving energy to other people. No. Recall the example in last episode about the person who loves to help people, gets so much fulfillment out of helping people. And so a day of helping their friends pack up boxes and move to a new house, even though it's exhausting physically, and at the end of the day, they can't do anything else with their body, it may take a full day to replenish their physical energy, their life force energy, their prana is buzzing within them, and they've still been able to give energy to others. When we apply this to loss, we're really talking about the prana that we give to either the life that the person who is gone would have had, or the life that I and them would have had together without this loss. All the what ifs. And then putting our own life force energy into those what ifs as we hold on to what could have or would have been. So when we set this boundary around ourselves when we're in the grieving process and facing loss, we have to identify what is theirs and what is mine. What is yours and what is mine? What's their baggage? What's my baggage? What's their present, their future, their past, and what is mine? What am I responsible for? Because ultimately that responsibility is for my own life, not theirs, whatever it may be or whatever it has been. For example, my dad always wanted to be an astronaut, as far as I knew. He was a pilot and wanted to apply for the astronaut corps. He wasn't able to, and so never carried out that dream. When I got to the end of high school and was applying to colleges, and they started to ask me about the subjects I was interested in studying or the career path I was curious about, astronaut came to mind immediately. It felt like it was the right path for me to follow, the path that made sense for me. So I studied astrophysics. Then I created my own major in astrobiology. I went to go work at NASA. I went to go work at SETI. I did a simulated mission to Mars. I worked at the Space Studies Board in space policy. I spent a good 6 years of my life following this dream, but feeling as time went on that it wasn't my own. Throughout those 6 years, I put so much energy into achieving that goal that I was moving further and further away from myself, which is what ultimately led me to start discovering myself. So while I am grateful that I finally got to that point and started to see who I truly was, as I look back on that time, my life force energy was not my own. My life force energy was going far beyond myself, and I did not have boundaries around myself to keep myself in. This comes up a lot in relationships ending as well. When this happens, consciously or unconsciously, positively or negatively, we often give a lot of our life force energy to the other person or to the relationship that we could have had together that no longer is together. This can come up a lot during the holidays because the holidays are a time of memories, a time of being together, which is why I'm talking about boundaries leading into the deeper holidays that we celebrate as we come together at the end of the year. So whether it is a loss of a relationship, of a loved one, of a chapter of life, or an identity, because we can grieve loss of identity And that was part of my process, losing my assumed identity of being an astronaut. When we have healthy boundaries around ourselves and around our own energy and what we are responsible for, we have an opportunity to investigate and decide how much of our life force energy, how much of our time, our thoughts that we give to what could have been. We get to decide how much to incorporate them into this next chapter. We also get to decide how to honor what has now changed. Because as we're identifying and holding these healthy boundaries, it doesn't mean, again, that we're pushing people out. It means we're setting up and communicating the distance that we can equally love ourselves and the other person. So today we've explored setting boundaries when we're grieving around who we talk to and spend our time with through the grieving process, around when we let ourselves grieve and feel the emotions of loss, and setting boundaries around ourselves and deciding how much that we take on from the thing that no longer is. As you digest this episode and begin to experiment with your own healthy boundaries, especially as the holidays come up, remember that this is hard work. That's why it's called the work. Whatever challenges come up, however many times you see yourself crossing a boundary, but not able to communicate that boundary, that's okay. The first step to change is always awareness. Go easy on yourself. Notice when it happens. Notice how your body feels and keep practicing. And if you feel like you want more support to learn these tools and get more practice, having a guide to show us the way is part of the process. Whether that is a wise friend, a mentor, a quote, or a coach. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. I'd love to hear about what you're going through or the questions that you have about this process or these teachings. If you're curious to learn more or want to chat, visit inner-eye.org/get-started to learn more. That's inner-i.org/get-started. And for those of you who love our homework, here it is. Much the same as last episode, continue paying attention to your energy and your thoughts when conversations about the past come up, especially as the year comes to a close. What conversations, what people, what thoughts, what actions and beliefs deplete your energy, and what give you energy? Start there. Thank you, dear human, so much for exploring inner space with me today. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and a rating on Spotify to help others find their own path to healing and healthy boundaries. Know when new episodes hit your headphones by subscribing to Inner Space. And if you know someone who could benefit from this episode, share it with them. To learn more about my work as a grief doula, connect with me on Instagram at inner.i.griefdoula or head to our website, inner-i.org. That's INNER-I.org. I'm Danielle YS, and until next time, keep looking in.